Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite areas of building design, and that is health and well-being. And this so happens to be our design fundamental number 3. I'm Roger Borland from Borland Architecture, and welcome along to another episode. So today, as I mentioned, health and well-being is the topic, and this is such a critical part of our indoor experience of our general experience of living in a building. We need to get this right. We've been getting it wrong for so many years, and we seem to be failing to understand how to do this properly and to get the right tools in place to ensure that we maximize our health and well-being. In fact, this problem's been around for decades. In 1987, 14 people died in Wollongong from poor indoor air quality, which led to Legionnaire's disease. And these problems are rising more and more in modern buildings. In fact, we believe that it's actually going to increase due to the current 7-star code that's been brought out. Now, I want to put a caveat on this. I am all for energy efficiency. In fact, it is one of the core things that we try and do as a business. However, we need to understand the consequences of doing this and make sure that we do it in the right way to maximize the health and well-being and ensure that we're not creating a problem. So it comes back to Newton's law, his third law, which states that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So what does that mean for buildings? It means that if we add more insulation and more air tightness into our buildings, that has a knock-on effect on how the building will react to its occupation. So let's break that down a little bit. How does that happen? So if a building has more air tightness, it means that the contaminated air that we have inside doesn't have a path to get to the outside in the way that it did previously through gaps and windows and doors and through the structure generally. So that's number one. Second part is adding additional insulation into the building changes the thermal dynamics of the building, but it also changes how moisture moves from inside to outside. So previously, in uninsulated buildings with gaps in the windows and doors and through the structure, that moist, damp, smelly air could just exhaust through the building structure itself. With more insulation, what's happening is that warm, humid air internally, which carries a lot of moisture, and so this moisture comes from us breathing out, it comes from cooking, it comes from cleaning, it comes generally from living in a space, right? So this moist air needs to escape. It needs to go somewhere. And what's happening is that as we warm up our internal environment, as that warm air then gets into our wall structure, crosses through the insulation, so this moisture can pass through plasterboard, it passes through insulation. But as it passes through insulation, the temperature changes. If you've got 20 degrees inside, you've got 0 degrees outside. At some point through that insulation, it's going to get to, let's say, 10 degrees, which it may be in the middle of the insulation itself. Now, if the humidity, the relative humidity and the temperature are in the right proportions, that will cause condensation to happen in that insulation itself. Now, this is a problem, a major problem, because this condensation leads to mold. The mold will grow on the timber studs within our building structure, for instance, because they're bio-based material and mold is a bacteria, and bacteria need something to eat. And it will eat at the timber studs. Not only does that bacteria then have an influence on our respiratory systems, leading to things like Legionnaire's disease, but it also affects the building structure itself. It means that the structure will start getting wet and it'll start deteriorating over time. And this has led to sick building syndrome, which we've seen all around the world and is as I mentioned, now a leading problem in our modern building structure and design solutions. So we've got CO2, which is what we breathe out. So too much CO2 is actually toxic for us as human beings, and having airtight buildings capturing that internally for too long leads to drowsiness. It leads to our brains not working in the way that they should. And the problem with this is that we're spending so long inside our buildings now. It's up to 90% of our human activities happen inside buildings. And so this is a huge impact on us. We need to get this CO2 out of the building so that we've got a much healthier mix of air and oxygen generally, so that we can thrive and lead better lives. So CO2s is one. VOCs is the next one. So VOCs are the off-gassing material that comes off building materials, it comes off furniture, it comes off clothes, it comes off all manufactured products generally. So it's in the glues, it's in the resins, things like that that hold these materials together. And yes, we can have low VOC materials in our buildings that reduce the problem in this scenario, but we can't control everything. You as an occupant may go out and you buy a new sofa that comes from anywhere in the world, and it's very hard to control the VOC levels within that product and how that will off-gas into your environment. And you just, again, you don't know. It's not something you can see. It's not something you really experience. But it is affecting your health. It's potentially causing cancers in our bodies. It's potentially causing just poor health and well-being and respiratory issues over time. Next one is viruses. So again, as we saw in the COVID period, we're now much more aware of viruses. But it can just be colds and flus and simple things like that just get us down. They mean that we're less productive than we should be. We're off sick more often than we should be. And these things, again, can be controlled. But our airtight buildings are holding on to these viruses for longer, and it means that we can pass it on from human to human. The next one is allergies. So there's two things on allergies. One is having an airtight building means that we're not getting as much pollen into our building as we were previously, which is a good thing. However, we do open our windows and doors, and we do have pets, and we do have dust, and these other things can lead to allergies as well. And whenever we close the doors again, we're capturing that inside our buildings again. So unless we have a means to take that and put it outside and exhaust and replenish that air again, we're creating a problem for ourselves. The next one is light and darkness. And so this is about general good window design and the right orientation, making sure that we have connection to nature, we have connection to the natural world. As human beings, we need to have this connection. We feel better for it. We get recharged from the sun, we get energy from it, but we need to have it in the right proportions as well, so we reduce glare and we can be as productive as possible in the right environment internally. Noise and vibration is the next one, so having a building envelope that manages outside noise so that we can concentrate, we can be at our productive best. And again, this is not just external, but it can be internal as well. We're again working from home now. We've got issues with the extended family being in the same spaces. We need to have separation that is acoustically controlled and zoned and managed from that point of view as well. The last one is probably the most important one, which is just general comfort. And so airtightness and more insulation is fantastic from a comfort point of view. And so we want to encourage more of this. We want to be more comfortable in our buildings. We don't want drafts. We want to ensure that we have a consistent internal temperature so that we don't get the fluctuations. And it's often the fluctuations that makes us feel down, that makes us feel cold, too hot, too cold all the time, and that can again lead to wellness issues that we want to manage to mitigate through the design process. So how do we solve all of this? There's a lot of problems in there, and thankfully there is a solution. And the solution is the way that we actually do this through our design fundamental. And the first one is through what's called biophilic design. And so that is the experience that we have walking through a forest. So when you walk through a forest, the noise of the trees blowing in the wind, the sun on our backs, the experience and the calmness that we get through that walking experience happens because we are natural human beings. We're part of the natural environment, and we resonate and we feel better in that environment. So we need to try and bring that experience into our homes as much as possible. Now, in an urban environment, this can be difficult, but there are ways to do it. And the ways to do it is making sure that we have well-proportioned windows and doors that do connect us to the outside, light, air, and nature generally. So it could be that maybe you don't have a garden, but you are connected to the sunlight. You're connected to the wind. You can see the trees in the distance blowing in the wind. You can see birds in the sky. If you do have a garden, obviously creating a natural environment that you can be visually connected to there is even better. The second part of this is ensuring that the materials that we use in our buildings are as natural as possible as well. And so removing, at least limiting manufactured products as much as possible, and replacing them with timbers and stones and fabrics that have a natural texture to them. They have the look and feel of nature, so that we can resonate and we can feel better around those materials as well. It really does work. So that's biophilia. This next part of it falls under a bracket, and we solve it through something called Passive House. And Passive House has a number of aspects to it that all relate to the health and well-being of the occupants generally. And the first one is trying to use bio-based materials and so on, so that we minimize VOCs in the first place. And so this means that we use timber structure where possible. We use materials in the building that don't create these off-gassing materials. And like I mentioned, we can't control this completely because you as an occupant may bring outside sources in that have high VOCs. And so if we do have VOCs in our environment, which inevitably we will have, we need to then be able to exhaust those chemicals out of our buildings. And when I mentioned chemicals, it's VOCs and CO2 and any other type allergy and virus material that is in our indoor environment, typically including moisture. And so a ventilation system which is mechanically operated, that runs all of the time, is a critical part to doing this. And it's only when we have this coupled with airtightness and more insulation that we get the best possible solution. So an example of mechanical ventilation is a bathroom exhaust, right? So that does a fantastic job of exhausting all the moist, smelly air out of your bathroom and dumping that outside and replacing it with fresh, clean outside air. However, it's not a great solution, because whilst it is taking out all of those pollutants, it is also taking out all of the energy out of the building at the same time. So if you have heated your internal environment, that is also getting removed and put outside, and then bringing in outside air, which could be 20 degrees cooler, bring it in, which means you then have to heat that up again. So a much better solution, which is required as part of the Passive House solution, is what's called a heat recovery ventilation system. So this is a very clever piece of kit, right? What it does is, like the bathroom exhaust, it exhausts the smelly, dirty, smelly air outside. But before it takes it outside, it captures the energy within that air. So like I mentioned, you might have a 20-degree difference between inside and outside. You want to ensure that the energy that you've put inside the building to keep it at a comfortable temperature remains inside the building. So this captures that energy. It then brings fresh air in from outside, and then filters it, and then it mixes it through this captured energy and then puts it back into the living spaces of the building again. So that we are recycling the energy in the building, but we are not recycling the indoor air. And this is a very important aspect of ensuring that we get a healthy building that is energy efficient as well. The next two is a bit of a paradox, because previously I mentioned that air tightness and insulation are part of the problem. But in this scenario, when coupled with the heat recovery ventilation system and well-designed structure, they become part of the solution. And this is part of the misconception that is out in the general public that I'd like to try and put right. So air tightness in the building fabric itself is a very important aspect to ensure that we have good health and well-being. What it means is that we don't get the temperature fluctuations through drafts in that building structure, and so we get much more comfort internally. It means we can capture the energy and again help with that comfort. It means that any outside toxic air such as carbon monoxide, radon gases, particle matters in the outside air generally is being kept outside and managed. And then, like I mentioned, with the heat recovery ventilation system, we actually allow that air to come inside, but we filter it first through a specific system. So it's very controlled and it's managed. And it's ideally, it's got the ideal mix of oxygen and so on that our bodies require to have maximum productivity and health and well-being. Next part is the insulation component of it. So adding more insulation to get more energy efficiency in our buildings is a critical part of ensuring that we have great energy efficiency moving in and making these buildings last for a very long time. However, we need to ensure that that moisture that I talked about previously doesn't get trapped in that insulation. So how do we do that? One is obviously we've got the airtight layer now, which is inside of the insulation, and that stops air from moving into that wall structure. And if you stop air moving through that structure, you're also stopping the moisture moving through that structure. And that means that that moist air is actually kept inside the building, and then we've got the heat recovery ventilation system which removes those toxins and damp air from the internal environment. However, we can't stop all that moisture and air moving through it. Well, we can stop the air, but we can't stop all the moisture getting through. And so what we do then need to do is ensure that we've designed that external envelope in a way that any moisture that does get into that structure is ventilated naturally on the outside of the building structure itself. And so there's specific detailing we have to do to manage that and make sure that we can make that building as healthy as possible for as long as possible and not have these issues building up in our structure generally. So there you have it. It's a lot to digest, I agree. So if you do have any questions around this and would like any information at all, please do reach out, send us a message, leave a comment below. Happy to respond to you and give you more information. If you felt this was really valuable to you and you'd like to learn more about how buildings work and how to design them better, please like, subscribe, and if you think there's somebody else who may also enjoy this content and get good value out of it, please share this content as well with them. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Roger Borland, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.